Good morning and welcome. We are about to hear House Bill 316. We have a significant amount of people signed up for this to speak, and we have a number of bills after this. So we're going to be limiting testimony to 3 minutes this morning. Sophie will be keeping our time. Just a reminder, if something has already been said, a point has already been made, I would ask you to move on from that. If you're here to read testimony, if you'd prefer to submit that, you can do that. Otherwise, if you're reading it, we would just ask you to summarize what you're reading in an effort to keep the day moving. So with that, I'm going to open the hearing on House Bill 316 relative to reimbursement for ground ambulance services. I don't see Representative Hunt here, but I can introduce the bill.
You want me to introduce it for him?
Sure, go ahead.
Can you hand it to me? 316?
Yep, you got it.
So thank you, committee members. For the record, I'm Senator Avard, District 12, just introducing the bill for Representative Hunt. This bill basically makes changes to the regulatory environment for ground ambulance services and the commercial health insurance reimbursement for these services by establishing a uniform default rate schedule, prohibiting ground ambulance providers from balanced billing, providing continued update for the rate schedule, and establishing a commission on all player model programs for ground ambulance services. And with that, I will hand it over to whoever wants to speak next.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Representative Stringham. I don't see him here. I don't know.
Introducing another bill, he said it would.
I'll skip that to Representative Prue.
He's in the hall.
Tommy, could you ask? Yeah.
Wrong bill.
Oh, dear God.
She's here for the second one. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Mark Prue, representing Hillsborough 15, Manchester Ward 8. So I think we all know this, the story is that set at this rate, these companies will not survive, right? We've already had a couple in New Hampshire go out or running on skeleton crews. So if anything, kill it, because we'd rather go back to the old system where we can bill. Hopefully the insurance pays us what they owe. And if we can't, we try and balance bill. Not what we want. We would absolutely prefer the insurance company pay the bill that we send them. Because I know when the oil company sends me my bill, I can't say, well, you gave me $1,000 worth of oil, I'm only going to pay $500 because that's what I think it should be worth in this region. Because if I do that, I go to jail. So not really sure why they get away with, well, we don't believe we owe you what you billed. And we're billing what it costs us to run. We're 24/7, 365, right? So we're paying that staff, paying for the equipment, paying for the upkeep of the material, of the units themselves, the equipment. Right now, my department has 3 monitors that used to be like 30,000. They're now 70,000 to replace them. And we're going to have to replace them this year. And you can't run it without them. So we have a lot of expenses, and we would really hope that either we move up the rate that we're going to be able to bill or get paid, or go back to the old system and just kill this.
Right, thank you. And just for the record, Representative, on the sign-in sheet, you checked off that you are in favor of this bill, but it
Oh,
sounds like
sorry.
all right.
I'm in favor of killing it.
All right,
Thank you.
all right, very good. I want to make sure we make
Yeah.
that clarification.
Yeah.
So
My bad.
all right,
I
very
was a
good.
little rushed this morning.
Any questions for the representative? No, thank you very
Thanks.
much. Chris Stawas.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Chris Daywaz. I reside in Hollis, New Hampshire, and I'm on the executive board of the New Hampshire Ambulance Association. I've been a paramedic for over 40 years in New Hampshire and managed our state's 2 largest EMS systems for most of my career. The New Hampshire Ambulance Association opposes HB 316. We began this process with one clear and simple goal: to end balance billing for commercially insured patients without compromising ambulance reimbursement levels. In other words, to protect consumers from surprise medical bills while also ensuring public safety remains strong and sustainable. Unfortunately, HB 316 as currently written does not meet that goal. In fact, with its proposed reimbursement rate of 202% of Medicare, this bill falls short and puts our entire emergency medical system at considerable further risk. When the bill passed the House, the sponsor declared that he had fixed the crisis in EMS by standardizing ambulance reimbursement rates. I wish that were true. HB 316 doesn't fix the crisis, it actually makes it worse. HB 316 protects commercial insurance companies, allowing them to continue underpaying for critical services while shifting the financial burden to New Hampshire property taxpayers, who are already stretched thin. These are costs that should be covered by insurance premiums, not local tax dollars. Let's talk about current reimbursement reality. About 70% of all ambulance reimbursement comes from a government payer, either Medicare or Medicaid. This bill does nothing to fix that imbalance. Right now, Medicare pays just 46% of the actual cost of care, and New Hampshire Medicaid even less, at about 42%. Those are unsustainable numbers. And yet, despite this reality, HB 316 proposes to set commercial reimbursement rates at just 202% of Medicare, a number that has been universally opposed by every ambulance provider in the state. Not some, not most, every single one. So who supports this bill? Not our paramedics, not our EMTs, not our municipal EMS services, volunteer EMS services, or private ambulance providers. The only supporters are the insurance carriers, their lobbyists, and the New Hampshire Insurance Department. Let me be clear, this is not a public safety bill. It's a cost-cutting measure for insurers at the direct expense of our first responders, our towns, and ultimately the people that we care for. Some may say that raising reimbursement levels will drive up insurance premiums to unsustainable levels. That's simply not supported by the data. Increasing the reimbursement rate to 325% of Medicare, a level we support, would have a minimal impact on premiums, about $10 a year per person, but a major impact on sustaining our EMS system, and it ends balance billing once and for all. Nationally, ambulance reimbursement makes up 0.1% of commercial insurance payments. And my time is up. But there is a path forward, one that protects both patients and providers. Set the reimbursement rate at 325% of Medicare. Add a pilot clause to allow for time for a comprehensive independent cost study to take place, not one that is flawed like the one that took place previously. And use that time to address the deeper issues, including the chronic underfunding of Medicaid at the state level and Medicare at the federal level. In closing, I want to emphasize ambulance billing is complex, but the people providing these services, our EMS professionals, are the experts. We ask you to please listen to them. The stakes are too high to get this wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Avard.
Thank you. Seeing how I've dealt with you guys pretty quick earlier, I was wondering if you could tell me the mechanics. I mean, the firefighters showed up first, and now are they part of the reimbursement, or how are they covered with this as well?
That's a great question. It all depends on the system. Some systems have first responder fees that go back to the fire department or the agency that responds first. Nashua is a great example of that. It's a private contractor, AMR. We reimburse the city for the cost of dispatch fees and for taking the calls in and dispatching them out. So there is a transaction that takes place financially to be able to pay for that part of the system. And a loss of revenue would obviously impact our ability to be able to continue to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Hunt.
I apologize. I did not realize this was scheduled for today. So, at any rate, I will be brief. This bill is, as you can see, is a request from the insurance department. So I hope you will listen to what the insurance department tells you. Okay? This issue has been around my entire 40 years as a legislator. Always been around. And now I want to just emphasize that the House Commerce Committee decided, rather than just one more time kicking this can down, we came up with a solution that is fair. It is not a number just pulled out of the air and say, oh, other states have done this, so that must be a right number. We did something calculated to make sure we have a long-term solution for this problem. And it's well thought out. We did a survey to find out what it really costs. We solved another problem, which people, sometimes it's talked about and sometimes it's not. And that is what happens when the ambulance shows up and the patient says, thanks for taking care of me, but no, I don't want that ride. This bill addresses that. Now, in terms of saying is, well, what is the right number to make ambulances whole? You are never going to get the right number. And one of the other bills we had, the representative made it very clear that even your bill, the 325% bill, even that wouldn't cover it. Why? Well, because the reality is with Medicare and Medicaid is 80% of the people who ride the ambulance. And they're the ones that are not paying the fair share. But to come back and say, oh, well, let's let all the suckers who happen to have insurance from their employer, and we're not talking about the large employers, ERISAs, they're exempt. So we're just talking about all the small businesses and individuals. Well, let's screw them. Let's hit them with a 325%. No, that's not what we were going to do in the House Commerce Committee. We were going to say, what is the right number? We have come up with a process which will be reevaluated every 2 years. This is the first time ever that a legislature has ever intervened and set how much reimbursement should occur. Okay? So just on the face of it, that is something that we would normally never, ever do. But we're doing that to solve this issue, at least getting more reimbursement for these ambulances. But I cannot emphasize enough that to say that the 10% of the riders should pay some unbelievable percentage and should be the ones who have to afford it. And the simple answer is that was because who really does pay for it now is cities and towns through their municipal budget. And I would say even after you pass this legislation, will not solve that problem either. Okay? They will always have to have a portion in it. Just like they pay for police and fire. I'm surprised they haven't come back with legislation to figure out how, we should make insurance. Oh, that's right. We did have bills like that, where they say have the insurance companies, property and casualty, pay for fire, for the fire department. That happened years ago. Needless to say, we didn't pass that. But to simply say, oh, well, let's relieve the pressure on fire departments and all of these municipal services, and let's just go after that small businesses and individuals, and make them pay for it? That's just not fair. It's just not right. This bill is well thought out. It is the right answer. And I'll take questions.
Any questions? No, thank you very much. Thank you for your work on this. Representative Stringham.
Thank you very much for having me, and appreciate being here. I'm Jerry Stringham. I'm the representative from Lincoln. By way of background, I formed a consulting firm in 1998 that deals with medical fee schedules, particularly as relates to new medical technologies and how they get sold. That firm is still in existence, but dealing with fee schedules is something that's been part of my professional life for the last 25 years. Not ambulance per se, but when I got to the State House and finding some of the issues going on with ambulance services and the vast number of bankruptcies and so on, I got very interested, obviously. I want to comment a little bit on whether 325 is a number out of the air and what number this 202% of the Medicare and Medicaid rates came out of the study. A couple of days before this bill was exec in the House, the insurance department made available the person and the group that performed the 40-page study. I had a lot of questions about it made me concerned about whether they were coming up with a reasonable number or not. Obviously, the ambulance services, and those in that field had an instinct that it wasn't the right number. So let me tell you one of the things they did. First of all, to calculate the cost, they added up all the costs from all the ambulance services, and then they removed from the cost any monies paid to the services by city and town, so basically property tax. So let's run the numbers, a couple of examples. Let's say you have an ambulance service with $1 million of service that they provide, or $1 million of cost. They provide 1,000 services, but that group gets $500,000 from the town in the form of taxation. They're going to take that, they took that $1 million and reduced it to $500,000. So the $500,000 divided by 1,000 services is $500 per service. But in reality, the cost is $1,000 per service, which would be $1 million divided by 1,000 services if they were all the same. So why did they do that? And they said, well, that's what we were told to do. One part of this bill is it tries to promote the idea that we can have an all-payer model where Medicare, Medicaid, and managed care will all pay the same amount. And I think one of the underlying assumptions on their part was we still wanted cities and towns to pay the same as they were before. Then therefore, we should take out the cost. But that's not the right. First of all, the all-payer model is never going to happen. I mean, I deal with Medicare and Medicaid, and they're not going to double their rates just because managed care is going to pay them. The only all-payer model that's been in existence for a while was Maryland, and that one in the last 2 months has been pulled anyway. Medicare is not going to say we're going to pay you twice as much. When they allow a waiver is when you're going to take the same amount of money and you want to pay it in a different way, and they may allow you to go outside their normal fee schedules. So anyway, that already brought, rather than being 202%, if you put back in that money, that would dramatically increase the fair rate that managed care should pay to pay their fair cost.
And I am going to ask you to wrap it up, Representative. That was our timer. You weren't here this earlier, but we're on a tight schedule this morning. So,
okay.
but
I will tell you, there were two other things that made the numbers low. One was they tried to find how much effort is being put in by volunteers and put that in. None of those numbers showed up, and then they had a fudge factor. I think 325 or higher would represent a fair cost and would be a better result for the service.
Thank you
And to
very-
get rid of balance billing. Thank you.
We've got a question here from Senator Abard.
Thank you for your testimony. So do you like the bill or you don't?
Not without significant amendments.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Senator Prentice, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair Rocheford and Representative. Thank you for taking my question. So in looking at the report that you referenced, they factored in this treat and no transport
Yes.
at $500, I think it was per call. So where that doesn't currently exist, does that undermine or skew the results of this report? Could it?
Yes, it could.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jack Wasmat.
Good morning. My name is Jack Wozmak. I am a former Cheshire County Commissioner. I am currently the Cheshire County Treasurer, and I'm also an EMT. Thank you for allowing me to testify this morning about this legislation. I'll be brief. HB 316 is a terrible bill, and I'm opposed to it. In the decades that I have spent in government with Representative Hunt, ambulance reimbursement rates have been a persistent issue, as Representative Hunt said. Representative Hunt has been the chair of the House Commerce Committee that entire time, and he's worked on this issue with no realistic solution. And this bill just continues Representative Hunt's long history of working against a viable solution. At least a dozen providers have collapsed financially due to poor reimbursement. I've been involved in 30 communities that are facing the same crisis. Cheshire County government got into EMS a few years ago because of poor reimbursement rates. The private company in Keene ended up with over $2 million in IRS debts and other debts and was taken out of business by the IRS. That left 23 communities without a plan for emergency medical services. County government was forced to step in and fill this void in very quick time. And so I know that there are other communities since we've started that are experiencing the same issue. You know, the thing I struggle with is Anthem had a $6 billion profit in 2024. And it's estimated that passing realistic reimbursement rates, like Senator Prentice has suggested, would add perhaps $1 per month to the subscriber costs, $12 a year, to try to get better reimbursement rates. It just doesn't make any sense to me that we would take a private burden, if you can even consider it that, and place it on the back of taxpayers simply because Anthem doesn't like to reimburse for ambulances because they think, like perhaps Representative Hunt, that it simply ought to all be paid for by the taxpayer. And I don't think that's necessary. I think we do enough cost shifting as it is down on the property taxpayers that we have this unique opportunity. Remember, Anthem, as a matter of federal legislation, is allowed to keep between 15 and 20% of every premium dollar that they collect. I wish we could be in that solution. I wish that could be applied to us and every fire department and every EMS agency out there. So this is just terrible legislation. It will break the back of EMS. It's already started. And like I say, we're currently talking with 2 other counties about a similar issue and what the solution might be. I'm not necessarily convinced that county government ought to be the vehicle for this, but we need to do something better than what we've done. And subject to any questions, I'll conclude.
Great. Very good. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Justin Van Etten.
Thank you, Senators. I represent Stewart's Ambulance. I'm the board chair. We are the largest rural provider of EMS in New Hampshire. I'd like to point out that the elected selectmen, city councilors, our fire chiefs, doctors and nurses throughout our communities were amongst the 700 people, public safety leaders and healthcare providers, elected officials who have signed in opposition to HB 316 and in support of Senator Prentice's Bill 245. And by the way, the opposition to 316 includes retired senators Bradley, Forrester, and Gaida, who have all worked on this issue historically, and they know that Representative Hunt's proposal will break EMS throughout New Hampshire. As Representative Stringham shared with you, the study, well-intentioned, was based on a number of incredibly bad assumptions that simply aren't true, such as Medicaid reimbursement doubling at a cost of $11.7 million, I believe, to the state of New Hampshire this year. I didn't see that in the budget, nor is anyone expecting it. But when you build a study on those kinds of assumptions, you come up with bad conclusions. Senator Prentice, in a question to you had asked about treat no transport. This is one of the things the study did. It assumed that EMS was all of a sudden going to be delivered in a way it has not historically been delivered in this state. That if we come to your house and you don't need us, you don't need to go to the hospital, you're going to get a bill between $500 and $750. This is done in a tiny, tiny little, maybe 1% of the communities are experimenting with this in New Hampshire. It's not a wide place thing. If they hadn't made that assumption, to your question, Senator, the consulting firm that did it said the reimbursement rates go up to 230% of Medicare. So they're making these flawed assumptions that have huge impacts on reimbursement. Finally, I would just say, although he said Senator Prentice is pulling her numbers out of the air in her bill, the reality of it is she's a national leader. She knows what's going on. She knows what has been proven to succeed. I don't love 325, but it's a number that has proven to work nationwide. It covers 1 in 5 Americans today that are higher. And most importantly, it has not impacted health insurance rates in those states that have adopted this. The only state that has experimented with Representative Hunt's rates are Maine. It required, and Stewart's was one of the largest providers of EMS. We had to pull out of the state because of the collapse in their EMS system. The rates that Representative Hunt's are proposing required a $35 million a year bailout from the state's general fund, and it is still a colossal failure. They are struggling with how they are going to fund EMS. The only constituency that has done incredibly well in the state of Maine where Representative Hunt's were the insurance companies. So I urge you, if you're going to pass it, amend it to Senator Prentice's rates. Those are fair and reasonable. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Avard.
Yeah, just maybe it's a dumb question, but so when you call 911, does the ambulance have to show up?
That is actually a really good question. No, we can send a state police cruiser, which many communities that can't fund ambulance service have had to start doing. Scary.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? No, thank you very much. Sarah Burke Cohen.
Good morning. My name is Sarah, excuse me. My name is Sarah Burke Cohen. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. This will be succinct and short, so I don't reiterate testimony already provided. NHMA opposes HB 316 for the various reasons. Some of the testimony already offered about opposition. We believe that the reimbursement rate at 200 or approximately 200% will not be adequate to allow for ground ambulance services to survive or continue operating as they do now. I'm going to leave it at that because you've already received testimony relative to the technical issues with the rate. Any questions?
Any questions? No. Thank you very much. Michael Sitar.
Don't say sitar. You have to play some music.
CTARs.
Sitar. Well, look at my name. I've grown up with all kinds of complications there. So join the club.
I went to school with a Rochford.
All right.
Yes. So, I'll be brief. I'm just going to highlight my testimony, which is going to mimic much of what has already been said. My name is Michael Setar. I'm the chief of the Tilton Northfield Fire District. I'm a resident of Laconia, but today I'm representing the New Hampshire Association of Fire Chiefs. And we're against 316. HB 316 is bad legislation. It's bad legislation because it's based on a deeply flawed study commissioned by the New Hampshire Insurance Department and paid for by the insurance companies. The study is flawed because its findings are based on false or improbable assumptions. The first is that Medicare will double its reimbursement rates. With Washington's current climate, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. The study also assumes that the state will double its Medicaid reimbursement rates. Given the current proposed state budget, we know that's not going to happen either. The study assumes communities will start charging for treat no transport. This is a practice that most communities oppose. It's not currently happening in almost anywhere. There's a few communities that are trying it. The study assumes that EMS costs historically covered by property taxes are not costs insurance companies should reimburse. This results in the local taxpayers subsidizing insurance companies for legitimate expenses. The study also excluded 14% of its respondents simply because their costs were too high. The study did not exclude any communities that had abnormally low costs. Finally, the study did not account for expenses required to replace ambulances or equipment. Its stuff wears out. You have to replace it. Although the New Hampshire Association of Fire Chiefs supports the elimination of balance billing, it must be done where insurance reimbursement rates are adequate and do not place an additional burden upon the property taxpayers. The EMS service in New Hampshire is currently in a tenuous situation. Several EMS agencies have closed within the past few years due to financial hardships because of lowered reimbursement rates. And there are more on the edge. HB 316 does nothing to improve this situation. The New Hampshire Association of Fire Chiefs feel that SB 245, with reimbursement rates that align more with the sustainability of EMS in New Hampshire, is a better option. Local taxpayers already subsidize Medicare and Medicaid. The local taxpayer should not be subsidizing private insurance companies. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I have a question for you. We heard testimony that this is a long-lasting problem, that there's been assertions that this fixes a problem. So I'm assuming that this 316, I'm assuming you had a seat at the table when this was negotiated. So how is your position reflected in any of this that we have in front of us?
My personal position?
You're as the chiefs.
As the fire chiefs. So our position is that although 245, Senate Bill 245 is requesting 325%, it's actually costs more than that. In my organization, we have a formula that calculates the costs of doing EMS. And to put it in round numbers, say it cost $1 million to run the fire EMS department in Tilton Northfield. And 70% of our calls for service are EMS related. You break it down, so $1 million, 70% of that $1 billion is $700,000 is for EMS. The other 30% would be for fire or inspections or something else. And if we do 1,000 EMS runs, you divide 1,000 EMS runs, transports, into that $700,000, that's the cost it cost us to transport that patient. Now, the formula is a little bit more complicated. That has, CIP and all that kind of stuff, but not happy to share the formula we use that's voted on by our Board of Fire Commissioners, and it's substantially more than 325, but 325 is at least something that will get us closer to where we need to be.
So I guess what I'm getting at is this 316 doesn't reflect your position.
It does not.
And you did have a role in trying to put your position in this
I sat on the commission that the insurance commission, insurance department had before 316 was written. So I sat on that, and the only people in favor of something in the area of 200% Medicare were the insurance companies.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Senator Prentice has a
Thank you,
question.
Chair Rochford. And just a quick follow-up to the chair's question about your position as it relates to this legislation. Would it be accurate for me to state that the New Hampshire Fire Chiefs want to eliminate balance billing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Balance billing is a headache that nobody really wants to deal with, but it's something that we have to deal with right now to keep us sustainable.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Paula Rogers.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
Members of the Health and Human Services Senate Committee. For the record, my name is Paula Rogers, and I'm here on behalf of America's Health Insurance Plans. Now, AHIP is a trade association, and in that capacity, we have members here in New Hampshire that you frequently see in their individual capacity: Harvard Pilgrim, Centene, Anthem. What else do I have? Cigna, there we are. CAM, how could we forget CAM? And so as a trade association, I will tell you very firmly that there is rate setting or rate schedules are anathema to insurance companies. It's just something when they hear it, they have a very negative reaction. So I just want to push that aside for a moment. And I want to step back to something that Chris Staywas said. He said he had been in the business 40 years. And I can say for 15 of those years, he and I have been in the legislative setting discussing ambulance, but never to the depth of this year. Now, I had a couple of years off, and prior to those 2 years off, it was usually about what do we do about balance billing? What do we do about payment directly to the member for a service, or joint payment to the member and the provider? And can this fix the system? Well, clearly it was not fixing the system. And during those 15 years, I used to trouble myself with saying, well, why aren't people contracting more aggressively? i.e., why is everybody who's an ambulance service provider sort of heading to out of contract with us? And I never really put my finger on that, moved on, and then come back to the legislative setting. And I thought, well, this couldn't be just a New Hampshire problem. It's clearly broader. So if you go on and Google about, you're going to find that states, and you can come upon maps. I think the Commonwealth Fund has an interactive map where you can go from state to state and figure out what they're doing. And many of them are looking to do just what 316 and 245 are doing, looking at what do we do about the fact that Medicare and Medicaid don't pay enough, and that's 75% to 80% of the users, and the commercial insurers are 15 to 20, and we don't think they pay enough. And so there is that cost shift burden, which is also anathema to insurers. But putting to those two things, the cost share burden and how it goes on and how rate setting might eventuate, the reality is when 316 was heard in the House, I remember saying something is going to happen this session. And it's going to happen around some percentage of Medicare. It's gotten to that point where something has to be done. And of course, the insurance department, when I was out of the setting here, had gone ahead and done a study. And so I learned pretty immediately that the study is coming in at 202% adjustment. And then we have Senator Prentice's bill, and I think Representative Stringham's bill at 325. So the camp sort of separated into people that wanted somewhere around 200% and people that favored something at 325. I'm not so sure what the plans feel. We know that something is going to happen. If you look at the bills, 130, 245, 316, and 725, there are elements of things in there, and I'm glad Senator Prentice brought it up. Balance billing is at the heart of the bills in some ways. We have to remember that we're trying to all protect the consumer. And so if you look at those bills, two of them have commissions. Yes, I think so, 316. And I went up this morning and supported 130 in House H&S, which has a commission set up, which is not attuned particularly to the commission set up in 316.
And that's my bill, and I'm only going to let you continue because you're talking about my bill. But then, but then I'm going to have you wrap it up.
Okay, well, a commission is an important thing because no matter what happens this session, something needs to be done about taking a comprehensive look at the delivery of the services that the people behind me provide in a rational way, and what can we do to make those services delivery more dependable and maybe even more efficient and less expensive, perhaps. I don't know, but something needs to be done.
So just to clarify this, I mean, you're not opposed to a rate setting model.
I am telling you that intellectually, there's going to be this sense of opposition, but practically speaking, something's got to give here. And so, I mean, I listened to the discussion around the study at the department and 325, where did it come from? I could go on about that. I know you don't want to hear that, so I'm just saying that I want you to understand the plans are here because they want to participate.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Senator Abard.
Yeah, don't go anywhere. So I assume that you like the premise of 316, but obviously it's causing a lot of heartache with our firefighters in EMS. How would you make it better? How would you make this bill better so that it would have to be in the rates, right? I'm sorry.
We come in and we take our positions. There has to be some hands-on discussion of, okay, what can we do? We've heard criticism of the PCG group study, and some of that I can understand and understand why maybe the 202 is modestly inaccurate. We need to discuss it. Time is wasting. I mean, here we are. It's April 16th. So the session is pressing forward. And I don't know. I mean, you're the policymakers and John Hunt and Representative Stringham, and something has to give.
So would beefing up that number help with this bill?
I cannot speak to that. But clearly, what I'm hearing is the pressure is on 202 to go higher. So that's where the pressure is coming from.
I'm looking at you. Okay, all right. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sabrina Dunlap. Kate, is Sabrina in the hall?
Good morning, Chair Rochfort and members of the committee.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sabrina Dunlap. I'm Senior Director of Government Relations for Anthem. At this point, I know you've heard a lot about what I think is a challenging but essential conversation about ambulance in the state of New Hampshire. Obviously, many stakeholders have been having thoughtful conversations, I think, for many years. And I do think there's a lot of challenges just with the nature of ambulance. The fact that it's part municipal, part healthcare, and I've always found that to be a very difficult challenge. And I think there's also understandable challenges for people in the EMS space who likely don't have the thought of collecting insurance info at the top of their head, if they're in an emergency situation. So I think there's practical and logistical challenges that exist for ambulance that just don't exist in other parts of healthcare. I do think the cost study conducted last year was a good faith effort to wrap our collective arms around what the real costs of ambulance are. To be clear, that was not the insurance company's idea. We did not do the study. And I just want to clarify the comment that the only ones behind this bill are insurance companies, because that's not really true. I signed in neutral. We generally don't support rate setting, as Paula mentioned. But I think between 325% of Medicare and 200%, the 200% is based on a cost study, and it seems a little more measured. And then I don't want to repeat what you've heard, but I think I said some of this at an earlier hearing you all had on ambulance, that several things can be true at once. We recognize the incredible importance of ambulance services. We recognize that changes may need to be made, perhaps through legislation, to help solve some of the challenges facing ambulance. We also generally don't support government rate setting, which both this and SB 245 do. And finally, both this bill and SB 245 basically do away with the concepts of networks, which is a foundation of managed care. And networks exist for many reasons. One of them is incredibly important, and that's for the benefit of our members. With networks, we have a contractual relationship with providers. We can credential them. We can help ensure providers have the correct background and qualifications to provide care. And without networks, we just do not have those safeguards in place. So I just think it's important to note that both of these bills, really do away with one of the foundations of managed care. And I think that sort of gets at ambulance being sort of uniquely challenging in the healthcare space. And I would just note, I think, some people think there is currently no network for ambulance. It's actually not true. We have a number of private ambulance providers in network and dozens of municipalities who are also in network. So I will just wrap up by saying, again, we don't think rate setting is the best path forward, but between HB 316 and SB 245, we do think that 316 is a more measured approach. So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Perfect timing. Look at that. You've done this before. Any questions?
Thank
Senator
you. I have one.
Prentice. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Rocheford. Thank you, Serena, for taking my question. And it's about networks, because I certainly am in favor. And I've expressed this to, AHIP and others of ambulance services negotiating and going into network. But I don't see where either one of these bills eliminates that. Is this just your opinion based on, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from on this, because I think that there's an essential push to do that, but why do you, I don't see any language that prohibits it. In fact, it's silent on it. That's what I think.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And yes, to clarify, the bills themselves do not have language saying, we're getting rid of networks. I just think functionally speaking, if you set a rate and say that's the default rate, whether it's 200% or 325%, and that exists for ambulance who are out of network, I don't see how there's a world in which we continue to have negotiations around rates to get ambulance providers in network. I mean, I think setting the floor at 325 or 200 just creates a world in which the default will be for ambulance to just stay out of network.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
okay. Thank you.
Thought I had a question there, and we'll save it. Commissioner Betancourt and Michelle Heaton.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is DJ Betancourt. I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I'm joined here at the table by Michelle Heaton, who is our Director of Life and Health. So I, too, am going to try to not be repetitive. I think you've heard quite a bit already this morning about the department's involvement in this long-standing issue. You've heard about the cost study that we conducted, not technically us. I want to offer a bit of a clarification on what you've heard. As Senator Prentice, I think, will well remember, as a result of the conversation that we had on this issue last session, a compromise bill or stopgap bill was passed that legally mandated the department to do an actuarial cost study. It put a very aggressive timeline as to when the results of that study were to be provided to the legislature. We moved as quickly as we could. I know the PCG, the vendor that conducted the study, worked as quickly as they could. You have heard that there are some exceptions being made to some of the findings. That's fair enough. I don't know whether or not some of those issues may have been worked out with more time, but I think that PCG did as good a job as humanly possible given the time frame that they had to deal with. They jumped into a lot of issues. They invited a lot of stakeholders to the table. And so I think that while there are some particular points within that study that, as you've heard, people are taking some exception to, I think by and large there's a very good foundation there for us to be able to wrap our arms around some of these very complex issues. Even before that, the department convened what I nicknamed the Ambulance Summit. We brought together legislators and stakeholders and carriers to really better understand the issue. I want to make it crystal clear because, again, I think you've heard some folks put forward what the department's position is. Well, I'd like to be crystal clear as the commissioner what the department's position is. And our position, as it were, in principle, is exactly the same as everyone you've heard here testify this morning. We want to see a prohibition on balance billing. We believe that is a core consumer protection measure that has been a problem for this state for a very long time. We want it to go away. Additionally, we want to do what we can to support our EMS providers. The whole motivation behind the Ambulance Summit, which took place in the summer of 2023, was because I was reading stories about EMS providers who were experiencing financial challenges. And so I wanted to better understand their problems, what they were facing, and seeing if we could find a solution to deal with the issues they were experiencing, as well as promoting and potentially achieving a longstanding position of the department as it relates to balance billing. So if I may just have 10 more seconds, Mr. Chair.
I'll give you 10 seconds.
Wonderful. I think Senator Avard earlier raised, I think, the key question, and that is, what do we do now? And I think that there's certainly some danger in the status quo. I think what I would suggest and what we intend to do as a department is to bring together another small group of stakeholders. At this point, I would say, and I want to be a little bit optimistic here and give some credit where the credit is due, because of all of the work that has been done by legislators and stakeholders and carriers and my team at the department, we've resolved every issue except, of course, the rate. Now, that's a big issue to deal with, to be sure. But in principle, all of the other components within the bills, I think, have broad agreement. So I think the stakeholder group needs to come together and zero in on the rate, dig into that, and see if there's a compromise position to be had. The House has taken its position. The Senate has taken its position. Let's see if we can find a solution in the middle. This is something that I know that Governor Ayotte and her office supports in terms of trying to find a workable, practical solution to this problem that supports EMS providers as well as protects consumers by doing away with balance billing. And with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Rochford and Commissioner Betancourt. Let me just start out. Well, first of all, thank you for taking what will probably just be one question, but I will preface it by a comment that I do appreciate the collaboration, even though sometimes bumpy, over the last few years that you initiated and reached out to me when you saw the downshifting. Primarily, we're starting to talk about like what's going on around Medicaid and those rates and how community and taxpayers were picking up that part of the bill. We've rectified that. I mean, we've got direct pay in line. We've rectified the Medicaid, even though we're facing a potential crisis there yet again that could impact EMS. So I recognize that, and I want to thank you. I just want to go back because I couldn't come to the meeting that was held right before the 316 work session, I believe it was, but I was able to Zoom in because your department allowed for that. And there was this discussion, and the fire chiefs brought it up too, about the 12 highest cost ambulance providers being excluded, but nobody would say who they were. Like, this was protected information. So I'm just trying to understand, was it 12? Why were they excluded? And who's got, what? I'm trying to understand, because
Sure.
It seems to me when you're trying to come up with an average that you balance between what's the highest, what's the lowest, and you zoom yourself into the middle. So why were they excluded?
So I know Michelle has some details to that in answering that question. What I will tell you is one of the big reasons we contracted with an outside actuarial firm is because this is a science that I'm just not an expert in.
Yeah, me too.
And Michelle may recall precisely why they did that, but I think it was grounded in when you're doing this type of study, those are the types of, I guess, actuarial principles or concepts that you apply to the study to ensure accuracy. But again, they can speak for themselves. We can certainly get them up here for you if you'd like, but I think that was the reason they did that. But Michelle.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
so There's a lot of explanation. I'll try to keep it brief, but essentially, given the limited amount of time we had to collect this information, what the vendor tried to do was collect the GATS information, which was an endeavor that CMS had already been undertaking to have EMS providers around the country submit this very detailed report. A good portion of New Hampshire providers had already done that analysis. So part of the study was just collecting that information they had already submitted to CMS. However, that didn't account for all CMS providers. So what they did is they came up with an alternative, very abbreviated portion survey that they can send out to the people who had not completed the GATS. They did that, and there was a very quick data or collection window in which they received all of these submissions. They did not have time to actually go back and verify that any of that information collected from the EMS units was correct and accurate. So what they were trying to do is just compile the data. As they were doing that, there were certain submissions that were just incomplete. They didn't have the necessary information. Those are some of them that got weeded out in the process. Some of them had, errors that were easily identified, like a decimal point in the wrong place, those types of things. Where they could easily identify clear issues, they did try to reach out to the submitter to clarify and correct those issues. However, there are still other ones that made into the sample that were not representative of New Hampshire. Some of those were providers that predominantly were out-of-state providers and not actually providing services in New Hampshire. There were air ambulance providers. These bills do not address air ambulance in any way, so those were excluded as well. So once we had that smaller pool, they then applied accepted statistical principles of data analytics, and the methodology they used is the 1.5 IQR. I'm not a mathematician or a statistician, so Google it, but it is an accepted practice when there is large deviation. Applying that model, it's a calculation, and anyone falling outside that calculation is then excluded as part of a statistical method. That resulted only in some higher end providers being excluded. And we're talking, way higher above the median or average. So that's why they were excluded. What was left then was used for all of the analysis. And if you have more questions, I'd probably have to defer to PCG on that point because that's the limits of my knowledge.
So that,
Follow up?
yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And this is either for you or for the commissioner, but just based, and thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation, taking it as far as you could. And I may or may not follow up with PCG, and it's going to depend on how we proceed. But you did say, at least this is what I think I heard, that and I've heard this from one other person, that there's been an expedited time frame by which to collect and complete this process, and that you use two words, about correct, incorrect, and potentially inaccurate data. So if we've got this study that's making this particular recommendation that is in this particular piece of legislation that was done, and I know what it's like to work in state government, done on an expedited time frame, and we've already been able to point to some issues with it. Would it make sense in your experience, not that I want to keep this rolling, but do we need to go back to the table or part of the table as part of a solution while agreeing on some type of stabilization mechanism to actually make sure that this is correct and accurate data that is driving that number for rate setting here that we're talking about?
So I think that falls a little outside of my expertise, but I'm going to channel Dr. Azis here. And I think those statistical... Oh,
and this
Come
commissioner
on
went
up,
for the
please.
microphone too, so
I will. I'll stall until Dr. Azis can take a seat.
you can, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Look, as I've said, at this point, I want to do everything that I can to find a practical solution to this problem. And again, it's a twofold problem. How do we stop balance billing? How do we support our EMS providers? If we are able to find, or if I'm able to help create an environment where a compromise can be reached, I think I agree with your premise, Senator, that the analysis in terms of what the numbers are and what the cost is should not stop at that point. I think it's something that constantly needs to be looked at and updated and understood. So yeah, and I think within both proposals, there is a mechanism by which there'll be continued study and there'll be continued work to look into this issue over and above whatever rate is ultimately agreed to. And let me just take this opportunity to say, I too philosophically am opposed to rate setting. I'm a strong believer in the free market system. Rate setting is not by any means my favorite thing in the world. To borrow, I guess, an analogy, this is my Nixon goes to China moment. But that being said, what you've heard is that for over 40 years, or close to 40 years, the parties have not been able to come to an agreement. And what has transpired over that time is citizens have been subjected to balanced bills, and EMS providers are struggling financially. And so in the face of that, and in the face of the fact that this has gone on for as long as it has, sometimes you have to take approaches to it that may not be your favorite or the ideal in your mind, but that's what's necessary in order to resolve this challenge. Did you want to add something?
Thank you.
Just if you have questions, Jason Azes, Director of Health Economics from the Insurance Department. And so I worked on the study with Attorney Heaton, and I'm proud of the work that we did, and it's not easy. I just wanted to point out two things. The expeditiousness or the expedited nature of the study is what drove us to use the already existing GADS data. So that the study took on the form of a secondary data analysis. That was by necessity. We couldn't query all of the 171 New Hampshire licensed EMS units. What we did find was that the study and the data by and large was well populated, but across a population, a sample population that we aim to derive from this study, we did note that there were some very hyperbolic, almost implausible cost reports in there. For example, there was one unit that reported an average cost of $212,000 per transport. We know that that's not right. So the statistical approach that we endeavored aimed to censor out implausibly high cost reports. And so the technique that we used was the 75th percentile, which is quartile 3, plus 1.5 times the IQR, which is the measure of variation. So it's important to note that it's the Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. That means that there were some indeed hyperbolic cost reports that were still included. So we were very liberal in the inclusion criteria that way. And I think that may have been misinterpreted. But by and large, the New Hampshire EMS units did a really good job providing good sound cost data. So the sample population that we used for the study to then derive the rate was really, really sound and solid. And I think that understanding how we censored those, because we've heard this a few times, how we censored those implausibly high cost reports has received a lot of scrutiny.
And there was a buffer in the numbers to account for some of these deviations in terms of the data that came in.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Next, I have Chris Lemelin. That's the last person I have signed up. Caitlin, could you check the list to see if there's anybody else? Please.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Chris, have a seat. Welcome. Let me have you turn on your microphone there. Here you go.
Red is on. My name is Chris Lemlin. I'm the executive director of McGregor EMS. I'm a member of the New Hampshire Ambulance Association Executive Board. And I'm here today because of a few issues. One is I do want to come out right from the get-go and say that McGregor, I know the Ambulance Association, support the end of balance billing of patients. And we want to get to a solution that eliminates that. I can tell you, in my role at McGregor, although they pay me mostly for what I do behind my desk, I still go out on ambulance calls, and we're small enough that a lot of times if you call our station, I'm going to be the one that answers the phone. And what that means is that I often am getting the phone calls from these patients who get a surprise bill, and they're upset about it, right? And we end up having a long conversation about, working through that. Why is that the case? We do offer a hardship process as part of that. I do also just want to say that we would ideally love to be in network with insurance companies. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I made an effort and called several insurance companies and reached out to them and said, listen, we're a nonprofit. I'm happy to open my books. We can have an open and transparent conversation about what our costs are. But, what you're offering for rates don't make ends meet. It would be a cut in what we're getting right now. I need you to come up a little bit on their rates. And of course, they said, nope, our rates are what they are. Take it or leave it. And so there's that element of things where we've tried to have that negotiation and it's not been reciprocated. But my biggest issue is actually because I still go out on ambulance calls, I have a little bit of that perspective. And I'm deeply concerned about the impact of the bill that's presented before you today. My concerns are a fewfold. One is, even if Durham in my town is okay when this bill goes into place, or if this bill were to go into place, I've been doing this for a long time and it's still distracting.
The alarm went off. It's not, no, and it's not moving. It's just
even if Durham ended up being okay in this situation, I don't know how many towns I drove through on my way to Concord today, but I could have had an emergency in any one of those towns. I regularly take advantage of the New Hampshire White Mountains. I think about all the Massachusetts tourists that I encounter on my hikes, all the other people in New Hampshire, and those are communities that maybe don't have the tax base to support a robust ambulance service. And yet, if I have an emergency when I'm coming off of a mountain, I need that ambulance service to be there to take care of me. And I think we can all relate to, we're all traveling throughout the state, and it benefits all of us to have a policy and a rate that's going to support EMS statewide. The last point I just want to make is around the treat no transport, and I can be brief about this. The example that was used when we were at the hearing at the Fire Academy is that if the ambulance service, and this was by I think it was PGA, the consulting firm. If we go out and we pick up someone off the floor who's, they've fallen and they can't get up, right? That would be what that bill is for. And I believe the bill is in the realm of about $400. My deep concern is that grandma, right, is often who we're talking about here, is going to be hesitant to call us now if we're forced to put that rate in place as a result of this cost study. I think there are situations, in which we do extensive care on scene and then we prevent a transport to the hospital where maybe it makes sense. But having that across the board, I think will really harm patients and is going to force us into doing something that we've never done in the past.
Great. Thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you very much. Anyone else that would like to speak on House Bill 316? With that, I'm going to close the hearing. All right. Okay, we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 559 relative to staffing requirements in emergency medical transport vehicles. With that, I'll ask the prime sponsor to introduce her bill. Oh, okay, all right. That's it. You only had two signed up to speak, so this is going to be quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Jennifer Rhodes. I represent Cheshire County District 17, which is Winchester, Richmond, Swansea, Troy, and Fitzwilliam.
Representative Mark Prue, Hillsborough 15, Manchester, Ward 8.
So, Mr. Chairman, the bill that you have in front of you is the result of one of the chiefs in my town coming to me about the difficulties after COVID with staffing requirements for the local town ambulance. And admittedly, being the vice chairman of criminal justice, anything to do with anything medical is certainly not something I'm an expert on. And my colleague, Representative Prue, has been kind enough to help me along the way with this particular bill. So the chief came to me and talked about during COVID how Governor Sununu had an emergency order that allowed ambulances to have two people, one being the driver and one being the paramedic. And during that time, everything, worked out at least as best as it could during that process. And then when COVID was over, that particular emergency order went away. However, the staffing issues have not gone away. And I thought it was a law, and it turns out it was a rule. So what I'm trying to do is to change that rule to make it be a permanent law. And what Representative Prue and I did is we found that emergency order, and we actually just copied it exactly. It was already written, and that is the verbiage that you see in front of you. The reasoning behind it was, if this was okay during COVID, we're trying to understand why it is actually not okay now. And whether it was, they thought maybe if lives were worth more then or less now or vice versa, at the end of the day, it's not okay. The problem still persists. And my friend can talk about the specifics.
So it's not something we want to do, right? But unfortunately, like she said, after COVID, people aren't coming back to these jobs. And they weren't coming back to these jobs even before COVID. So our staffing levels are down. Like in my department, I work for the Epping Fire Department. We try to run 3 ambulances. We can usually get one out the door. We can always get the one out the door. The second, most of the time we can get it out with 2 EMS personnel. Sometimes we can't. But we do have other firefighters that are there that they don't have a certificate, but they've been around enough medicals to know what to do to help us, right? So we're just looking for an option. Sometimes at night, the call people aren't there anymore. They don't want to come out at night. And so if we can at least get the ambulance to the door with 1 EMT and 1 firefighter, we've started it. We may call for EMS depending on the level of the call, right? We have a paramedic intercept service. So if it's bad enough, they're coming. So they'll be the second person in the back, or maybe even the third person in the back as well. But we're just looking for an option to get the ambulance to somebody's door in a very timely fashion. And I heard, well, you have mutual aid. Mutual aid can be 12 minutes away when we can be there in 2 minutes with 1 EMS personnel and a firefighter hauling equipment and helping me get them out to the ambulance. So I think this is a good bill. It doesn't say everybody has to do this, but if it becomes a necessity to save a life, I think it's a good bill for that, right? It's not the best, but it's something, right? I know there's 1 ambulance service against it because they want all those departments to use them. They don't want them to be able to get the bus out the door and go save somebody. They want them to defer to that company, which I kind of think is kind of crappy, but that's just my opinion. But so to let the town serve their people, I think this is a good compromise.
Sure. I've got a couple questions and
Sure.
I'm going to let my colleagues ask some. So you mentioned that this was waived during the COVID period.
Yep.
Do we know how many departments took advantage of that?
Mine did.
Yours did?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I represent 5 small towns, and I know one of my towns doesn't have their own ambulance service, but they share with a town close by. So out of the 5 towns, 3 of them did take advantage of this. And one of the things that we often hear is, well, your towns just have to pay more. You have to pay people what they're worth. Okay. The fact that they're not mentioning is that these are volunteer paramedics. They're volunteer, and it's not about the money to begin with. It really is about the personnel. So we're really just trying to make it to be an option as it was. So again, out of my 5 towns, I know at least 3 of them have, but we have heard from departments all over the state that if this were an option, it would be nice to use it if needed. It shouldn't be the norm, and we don't expect it to be the norm. We just want it to be an option as it was then.
Okay. And then Representative Prue, you said this is a good bill, but not the best. How would we make this the best bill?
Have enough people. How do we get enough people in the state? I'm not sure, right?
So you're talking about the situation is not the best situation.
I mean,
Okay.
this is a good bill for what we're trying to do, fix a problem. The problem is the issue. Right?
Okay. That's all my questions. Senator Prentice?
If I may follow up
Yeah.
just a little bit, she talked about some people told the towns pay what they're worth. The pool of EMS in the state is very small and getting smaller, right? So even if you try to pay them, there's not enough people for all the slots that you need. I know we have, in my department, I have 2 or 3 people that work for 3 different departments part-time because they're just jumping all over the place trying to fill those spots.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Senator Prentice?
Thank you very much, Chair Rocheford, and thank you both for taking my questions. And Representative Prue, it's always good to see you. I'm not always comfortable if we're not on the same side of an issue. So I'm going to, I have a fair approach to this, and for full transparency, I was once the chief of EMS and managed the licensing and regulation for the state around staffing. So I just want to put that on the table. So I do have some numbers from COVID, but I've got a couple of, Chair Rocheford, would you like the numbers from?
Yeah, I would. Yes, that would be
just
great.
So 2020, in the year 2020, 0.8% of the total transports were conducted with a single licensed provider versus 99.2% meeting the normal staffing requirements, which would be 2 licensed providers. And then 2021, it was similar, 0.9% were conducted with a single licensed provider and 99.1% meeting the normal staffing requirement. So you're correct, the option was there. And we're looking, we just had this whole discussion about how you come up with averages, but I asked the Department of Safety to go through their database and pull those numbers. So there was an option and it was used, but it wasn't used much, but it was there. But let's talk about this. Is it your understanding, Representative Prue, I'm just going to point this towards you because you're a fire chief, you've been involved in this for a long time, that an ambulance can go to somebody's house with 1 licensed provider? But when they transport a patient, they have to have 2.
Correct.
Okay. So an ambulance could move. I remember talking about this all the time with folks that you could, if you could direct staff to the scene, or even if you had to use mutual aid, you could still roll an ambulance with 1 licensed provider on it to get there. But if you're transporting, it has to be 2. Okay. So I wanted to bring that up. The second thing is, safety of the personnel. So I was involved in a project once where we looked at putting, nurses from emergency departments in some of the more rural areas because there was a staffing concern for emergency transfers. And one of the things that we focused on in preparing them was a safety training module, which eventually this all got rolled back because once the nurses did it, they were like, maybe there's a better way to do this. And they were great about it. What's the plan if there's something like this were to pass, to make sure that everybody if it's from the scene, because they can already get to the scene, to go to the hospital, have the, like, how are they going to be prepared? Because not all departments might be like your department or the ones in respectfully representative that you're speaking about. So what's the plan?
The plan is they're already firefighters. They're already think about safety, right? So, and of course, if we had somebody that we didn't think were fully on board, we would train
Keep
them.
on listening. I'm just.
We would train them, right?
Okay. And so your follow-up, Chair?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
one more after this. So you're, Representative Prue, thinking through this that it would always be somebody within your department or departments that you were aware of that were appropriately prepared
Correct.
to drive the vehicle, not care for the patient?
Correct.
Okay.
So I'm not going to let Joe Q. Citizen get behind the wheel of my ambulance and drive me to the hospital. I can assure you of that.
Okay. Do you follow up?
Yep.
Do you think it's possible with the way this is written that could happen?
God, I would hope not.
Okay. So these are,
I mean, I'm
these are
willing
not
to put that
criticisms, they're
amendment in
ways
it
to, like-
that it has to be a member of the department.
Okay. And then the last thing, Chair, as a quick follow-up in general, since this has been done in rulemaking, statute says what the standard is, rulemaking flushes it out, and there is an ability for an emergency declaration. Would it be possible to have a conversation about, as there is some room in rulemaking for the Commissioner of Safety to write licensing waivers in certain situations? Okay, is that a potential option to be considered by the sponsor and co-sponsors of this bill if something like this were to, if this
I'm
were to
not
move
sure what
forward?
that looks like or how long it would take to put in place if the need arose. Right? I think there's a need now, right? And as you proved, even during COVID, the amount it was used was very small. So do I think this is going to be a big thing? No. Nobody wants just one EMT in the ambulance, but sometimes it's a necessity, right? And you talk about getting the bus there, right? Calling mutual aid. What if they can't get anybody? I know some of the towns around us at night, we look at the I'm responding and there's nobody on the roster. And you hear the retones, and now you're reaching 2 towns away. That's a long time. Especially if you have somebody that needs to go. So I get your point that optimum is 2 EMS people in the back of the bus. We all want that, right? But somebody's got to drive, and even when they're driving, I'm alone in the back, right? The EMS person's alone in the back, or unless the intercept happens to show up, or sometimes we go out the door with 3. But there are times that we get multiple calls or crap's happening in an area, and everybody's going everywhere. So we're just looking to have that in our pocket that we can take out when we really need it.
Okay. Thank you for taking my questions. Oh, Chair, are you okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
If I may, this is something that I'm not proud of for the whole world to hear. And I wrecked my snowmobile. And when I did that, I broke both sides of my pelvis and my arm. And I was quite literally in the middle of an intersection, in the middle of the yellow lines, realizing that I cannot get off of this road. And fortunately for me, a friend of mine was a paramedic and just happened to be at that intersection. And he came and helped my husband and so forth. To be honest with you, I don't know how many people were in that ambulance. I think I passed out the whole way there. But if it was just one and somebody else that was, obviously driving, I can assure you I would have been the most grateful person in the entire world at that time. And I understand your questions about the safety. Mm-hmm. And I have another colleague in the House. And when I was talking to him about this bill, he said to me, Rhodes, that never happened. You don't know what you're talking about. There's always 2 people in the back. I said, respectfully, I don't think that you know what you are talking about right now, because this was used. And I'm very glad that your department never needed to use this option, but my departments did. And as you mentioned, the numbers were so very, very small. We're really just trying to give these departments an opportunity to keep serving their small towns. So I would just ask you to just, to consider that. And not everything is life-threatening, fortunately. And when they are, I believe that they're trained enough to be able to make that decision, as you mentioned, with your profession. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Anyone else that would like to speak on House Bill 559? With that, I'm going to close the hearing. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Open the hearing on House Bill 548 relative to licensing requirements for healthcare facilities that operate on a membership-based business model. With that, I have Representative introduce his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for giving me the opportunity to introduce HB 548. In this country, we're blessed to have the most innovative healthcare in the world. I think, our country is always leading the way with new medical advances, therapies, drug treatments, you name it. So we're very innovative when it comes to healthcare. However, when it comes to the healthcare system itself, we continue to find ourselves with an infrastructure that is very calcified, and I don't think can keep up with the needs of decades ago, let alone today. So the Affordable Care Act tried to tackle some of the woes and expand healthcare access. And through Medicaid expansion, it did expand access in the short term and provide some relief for uncompensated care. But here we are after more than a decade, and the situation is that rural access is in free fall, with CMS stating that up to 30% of the nation's critical access hospitals are in jeopardy of closing in the next 5 to 7 years. The promised price reductions never really materialized, and the system is even now more sclerotic than it was in the past. So it's my belief that we need to transfer the innovative mindset that is so prevalent on the treatment side of healthcare and carry that innovative nature over into the system itself. And so HB 548 is part of a tapestry of legislation brought forth by the House in this term that tries to do just that. What the bill does is it takes the primary care direct pay model that was passed into law by this legislature 3 terms ago, and it expands it to healthcare facilities. Supporters of this bill believe that it will open the healthcare marketplace up a tiny crack to expand pricing transparency, choice, and competition. So, like the direct primary care model already in use in the state, what the bill does is it will grant to those facilities that exclusively receive payment directly from the patient the ability to opt out of the all-payer requirement currently in state law. Because of this, those facilities that choose to operate under this model will be completely upfront in their pricing and may be extremely attractive to those patients who are self-insured or uninsured. So just imagine, and this is kind of where the bill is getting, how awesome it would be to be able to go in for a colonoscopy and know to the dollar how much you're going to have to pay. If you're self-insured, if you're on a tight budget, trying to make the best decisions you can with the resources you have, it would be great if you go to a place where you could escape the Byzantine billing of the current system and know upfront exactly just how much you're going to pay. HB 548 may also serve to attract providers to state who might find that it relieves them of the costly administrative overhead of the all-payer model, which, could be up to, administrative costs are up to about 1/3 of healthcare costs. So that could provide a huge relief from that burden. And it will certainly create competition and hopefully incentivize current providers to look at how they might make their own pricing more transparent. And that's something I think everybody has been trying to do for a long time. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the opposition to the bill, just because I don't have a chance to kind of redirect after some of those who are opposed to it might get up to speak. So I just want to speak up front a little bit, to what some of the opposition I've seen in the past and talk to it. So one of the things that folks say is, hey, you know what, this is cherry picking. They'll say that the transparency of the model will lure away the best high-paying customers, and also that it will drive the state's critical access hospitals into bankruptcy or closure. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about those concerns. And I want to talk about the Surgery Center of Oklahoma as an example. And the reason that I choose that is because just about every article that you read about direct pay facilities model references this facility as it was on the vanguard of the direct pay movement opening up all the way back in 1997. So what they do is they offer upfront pricing on their surgical services, and they absorb all the risk. So on those rare occasions that something would go wrong, they absorb all the risk. And I think that's a wonderful thing to have available to the people of Oklahoma and the surrounding states. And the question is, to the first objection, are they cherry-picking patients? Well, I guess so, because they certainly don't take Medicare and Medicaid. But in doing so, does that create a real risk to the healthcare system? And, are they putting Oklahoma's other hospitals, especially critical access hospitals, in jeopardy of being overrun by similar surgery centers? But the fact is that the Surgery Center of Oklahoma has been in operation for 28 years. And there has never been a second center built like it in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, there's 169 hospitals, 40 of which are critical access hospitals. But 28 years later, there is still only one direct pay facility in the entire state of Oklahoma. Only one. So with the bulk of the population on Medicare, Medicaid, or employer insurance, the Oklahoma example, I think, shows us that if we allow direct pay facilities in New Hampshire, the uptake would be modest at best. I think that's what we're learning from Oklahoma. I think the benefit of the model isn't in its widespread adoption. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the benefit of the model is in the fact that it allows for the planting of some small seeds of innovation and competition. And let's talk further about the impact on critical access hospitals, which is something, people always raise as a concern. But if a direct pay facility were to open in New Hampshire, do you think that it would be likely to locate itself in the rural areas of the state currently served by critical access hospitals? I myself don't have a crystal ball, but my bet is that if a facility that was to use this model were to locate, it would choose to locate in the south, in the more populous areas of the state, maybe even close to the Massachusetts border. So I don't really think that the stated threat to the state's critical access hospitals is significant. I think it's a little overblown. As I stated earlier, our critical access hospitals are under threat already from structural problems that predate the arrival of any direct pay facility. We have none here, and they have lots of other stresses. So comparatively speaking, when you look at those structural problems, I think that the impact burden of a new direct pay facility would be akin really to spitting in the ocean. I really think that we need to start diversifying the healthcare landscape now. Something else that critics have said about the bill is, it doesn't really provide a clear path to sustainable, affordable access. And they're right, it doesn't try to. There's not one thing that's going to basically solve all our woes. But I think the mistake that these critics make is they're assuming that the final path is going to be exclusively defined by the government and by us. I mean, we have a role to play for sure, but the strength of the bill, I think, is in opening up the marketplace to explore options that haven't even been thought of yet. And so I do hope you'll support it. Finally, just before I do stop, I do want to mention that I did hand out amending language for the bill. That amending language was sent to me by the counties. The original draft of 548, as I originally put it forth, also allowed for the creation of nursing homes using the direct pay model. But during the public hearing, there were many, including, the Archdiocese of Manchester and the counties, that expressed concerns that this might have a really tough impact on the nursing homes. And, I felt that those concerns actually were very valid concerns. And so I amended that in the House version, and it was already covered. However, the folks on the counties felt that that language needed to be clarified even further. And so they provided me with the amending language that you have before you, which basically is that clarifying language that they really wanted to have. I will mention that 548 was put into the budget, but the version that was put into the budget was the amended version that I wrote. It doesn't contain this clarifying language, and so I would encourage you to consider that. And with that, I'll end my testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got some questions. Just one of the, and you hopefully you can help me out with this. I was looking for the definition last night, a couple definitions that I couldn't find. One was intermediate care facility. What is an intermediate? Is that defined any? I mean, I looked through 151 and I couldn't find it anywhere there.
First of all, I'm not a subject matter expert, and so I think the folks from the counties here are going to testify. But it's my understanding that an intermediate care facility would be, these are for children, young adults with needs that just can't be handled through regular outpatient care. So it's inpatient care where they kind of address those. And I think is there somebody here from the county that will maybe could speak? And I see him nodding back there. Yes.
And then I heard your testimony. I heard what you're trying to do here. I'm just wondering, is 151:2 Roman, is this in the right section of law?
Yes, that is in the right section of law. So that section of law that deals with basically, that's the the 15-mile zone that we talked about. I know you don't like that term. Sorry, Senator Francis. That we talked about a couple weeks ago. That's the emergency room requirement, and that's the all-payer. So all of those are wrapped up in that part of the that deals with the facilities licensure part of the law.
All right. And then the other thing is, I know on the bill that we got from amended from the House, not with your amendment, you define direct payment in paragraph, page 2, lines 16 through 17. And I do understand what direct payment is, but the other question is, do we have a definition somewhere of a membership-based business? And I know what it is. I know what a membership-based business model is, but we don't have, I couldn't find a definition of that either.
And I apologize, but I believe it is, if you were to look at the statute for the direct primary care, I think it's there, but please don't quote me, Senator.
No, I'll look for it. Yeah. And it's, and I know what it means, but when we know what it means, we want to make sure that the law also says that in definition, matches our understanding of it. I don't have any further questions. Do you have any other questions from the senators? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and nice to see Senator Avard.
Yes, he's out there. He's getting it done. Honorable Jerry Knirk. And I would remind you, I made the announcement earlier today that we're at 3 minutes, aside from prime sponsors, so you could be mindful of that. We'd appreciate that.
Okay, and for the record, my name is Jerry Knirk, and I am here to speak against HB 548. What I'm testifying about is Section 4. Just Section 4 is what I'd focus on. And I'm a little bit confused because Representative McLean was speaking about critical access hospitals and so on, but that's not in this bill. That was HB 223. This bill on page 2, lines 12 to 17, is the part in Section 4 where it talks about intermediate care facilities and rehab facilities and hospitals. So that's what this subgroup is about. 223, we already kind of handled that. In any case, it's important to realize that the Medicaid reimbursement rate is significantly lower than the costs for taking care of people. That's been known for a long time. Intermediate care facilities and rehab hospitals and rehab facilities therefore need to be able to make up some of that revenue from self-pay patients and also from patients with commercial insurance. So what's the problem if you allow some facilities to only accept cash or members? Well, healthcare doesn't really function like a free market. It's a basic human need. The free market is great for consumer goods. If you want to get the best iPhone or whatever, you can shop around and get the best price. And if it's too expensive, you can say, I don't want to buy it. But that doesn't work in healthcare because healthcare is not a luxury good. If the cost is too high, you can't say, nah, I don't think I want that one. And so if you're 80 years old, you just sustained a hip fracture, and you need rehabilitation, you need the services of a rehab hospital or facility. You can't just say, well, that product's too expensive. I don't think I'll buy it. You have to go somewhere. And if you're from a rural area, such as I am, there's not a whole lot of choices. Proponents of this approach often say that just also allows the free market to function. However, the free market demands a level playing field. And this doesn't provide that because it would allow a small number of for-profit institutions. We fought this battle for years, as we're friends. But the bottom is it allows a small number of for-profit institutions to cherry pick the healthy and uncomplicated patients. Nothing here says they have to take all comers, either in terms of payment or even in terms of sickness. And that they can take them, the ones who can pay full cash price, that shifts that care of the sicker or more expensive patients, or patients who have Medicaid and don't get reimbursed as much, or the uninsured or other insurances that pay less, to the other facilities. And that will lead to an adverse impact, fiscal impact, on those other facilities, leading to possible closure facilities and perhaps leaving the less wealthy without any kind of option for care. And it's a real problem in rural areas. You don't have a lot of choice. And in fact, in our area, in Mount Washington Valley, I think all of the rehab facilities are part of the nursing homes. We don't have great big independent rehab hospitals. In summary, for-profit facilities, cherry picking the well paying and conceivably uncomplicated patients would have a significant negative impact on our regular facilities. Those losses will just be shifted to those who have insurance, which drives up the cost for everyone else, or they may even need to close if they go out of business. The goal for our healthcare system should be to provide healthcare, not to provide profits from caring for the wealthy while letting those who are less fortunate suffer and die. So please vote ITL on this bill. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? No, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Greg Moore.
Yeah, thanks. It was going to tip back.
Best improvement since I worked here with these new chairs. I don't care about the streaming. Thank you. For the record, my name is Greg Moore. I'm a regional director with Americans for Prosperity. I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 548. Very, very brief history of the certificate of need process. Began in a paper from UCLA professors in 1959, passed in New York State first in 1964, federal law in 1974 in the Nixon administration, incentivized states to pass it. By incentivize, it means it took away, withheld federal funds if you didn't. Ultimately, they learned that it wasn't working. It wasn't controlling healthcare costs. Under the Reagan administration, 83, they reversed that rule. So the financial incentives. New Hampshire, however, during that time period, did pass certificate of need law. 2011, Senator Long, former Representative Long might remember this. The House passed a law to repeal CON entirely and immediately. The Senate said, okay, let's give it 3 years. In the 2013 budget amendment, they kicked it out another 2 years. They say 5 years, okay, hospitals ready for competitive playing field. That still wasn't enough. In 2016, we passed Senate Bill 481, which is sometimes known as the son of CON bill, that included the provisions that this law is looking at. I would like to point out that in 2016, no one would have even considered having a direct pay facility model. At the time, the Affordable Care Act individual mandate was in place. So there was an expectation that everybody was either going to fall into the bucket of private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, or buying a marketplace plan. Obviously, in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017, the individual mandate was repealed, which created the oxygen for a direct pay movement. Shortly thereafter, in 2019, New Hampshire passed its direct primary care legislation. This is a natural follow-on to this. The rationale for this is by eliminating the third-party payment structure, you can save New Hampshire patients a lot of money. Estimates of the cost of the overhang of third-party payment is between 30 and 35% of healthcare. So that's a significant amount borne by people who oftentimes struggle to pay medical bills. I will just say that it's a fantastic opportunity. It's a very limited number of people. By definition, these are not people who are in network for health insurance companies. They are not enrolled Medicaid providers. They are not enrolled Medicare providers. The actual narrow window of people for whom this would apply is very small, but it would have a major impact on them if they can find lower cost health care. And it would not have a significant impact on the existing resources because the universe just is not a huge universe. I would just say that for all those reasons, we think it's a great idea to pass this legislation and to create that narrow crack in an opportunity to help people. And obviously, you have another piece of legislation looking at the critical access areas. If that law stayed in effect, then obviously it would really focus on the southeast portion of the state. You're talking primarily about self-employed and gig workers, which is a small but non-trivial number of people. But this would create a new opportunity for them to find lower cost healthcare. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
David Ross.
Good morning. My name is David Ross, and I am the administrator of Hillsborough County Nursing Home. I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Association of Counties. We are opposed to the bill as written currently. We can support the bill with the amendment language as submitted today by the sponsor. The counties are responsible for the non-federal share of Medicaid for residents receiving long-term services and supports. Our concern with the bill as written is that it's going to increase the costs for counties overall by increasing the population of Medicaid recipients in nursing facilities, which will have a direct impact on overall costs to the counties through that county cap or the non-federal share. Additionally, as a provider, it's going to have a significant impact is that it's going to dilute the amount of folks that are self-paying at the nursing facilities, and it's going to cause a direct impact to county taxpayers, certainly in Hillsborough County and each county for the operation of facilities. The moratorium on nursing home beds is specific to be able to cap the number of folks receiving that level of care. As a state, we really want to push growth in community-based care options. Providing any relief to that moratorium for nursing home sector is not going to achieve that. So we would urge you to oppose the bill as written and to consider adopting the language as amended today by the sponsor. I'll take any questions that you may
Are there
have.
any questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ben Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Ben Bradley. I represent the New Hampshire Hospital Association. We advocate for all 26 acute care hospitals in the state and all specialty hospitals in the state. We are opposed to this bill. I'm not going to repeat what's already been said other than to mention that we believe this bill bifurcates the healthcare system into two classes of patients and sets up a regulatory framework that treats facilities differently based on whether a patient direct pays. It also appears that facilities licensed with a membership-based business model would not have to follow Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services conditions of participation, which include important patient safety and quality requirements. Maybe the way we read the bill, a healthcare facility licensed as a membership-based business model could discriminate against individuals based on their ability to pay a membership fee, and we don't believe this is in the best interest of patients seeking care in these facilities, nor the healthcare system in New Hampshire. I also want to point out something that has not been mentioned and may have been overlooked by some of the advocates and others on this bill. This bill established a separate patient bill of rights, you'll note. And in doing so, creates two different Bill of Rights, which could be confusing for patients seeking care at facilities that offer the same or similar services. Specifically, I want to point out that Roman 5 on page 3, line 14, does not include the right of a patient, which explicitly states no patient shall be involuntarily discharged from a facility based on the patient if the patient becomes eligible for Medicaid as a source of payment. So these facilities are going to take in patients because they can pay a membership model, and then they're going to kick them out when they can't pay out of pocket anymore, and they apply for Medicaid. That doesn't seem right to me and the healthcare system in New Hampshire. Roman 16 on page 4 does not include the words source of payment. Again, lacking that basic patient right of protection of care, whether based on, regardless of a patient's source of payment. The Bill of Rights also does not include 4 additional rights that are not included. Again, an oversight. I don't know how you can support this bill without these provisions. You know, Roman 20 says in the existing patient Bill of Rights, they shall not be denied admission to the facility based on Medicaid as a source of payment when there's an available space in the facility. So even though they might have room to care for a patient, if you're a Medicaid patient, they're saying you don't have a right to access that bed. Roman 21, subject to the terms and conditions of the patient's insurance plan, the patient shall have access to any provider or his or her insurance plan network, and referral to a provider to a facility with such network shall not be unreasonably withheld. Okay, these are basic patient rights that are included in the existing patient Bill of Rights. 2 additional ones very briefly. Roman 22, the patient shall not be denied admission, care, or services based solely on the patient's vaccination status. That was established just a couple of years ago to protect a patient, to ensure they have care, no matter the basis of their vaccination status. And finally, Roman 23, which is relative to a patient's right to have a visitor. I say all this because I believe, and we believe, this bill is deeply flawed. It is not ready for prime time. And among all the other things that advocates for this bill have said and advocates opposed to this bill have reiterated, the patient Bill of Rights should not be bifurcated in the way that they intend to bifurcate care in New Hampshire. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Just looking at section 6, where there is the study commissioned on this. Would you support a study to examine the impact of direct pay models on the healthcare system?
I think we stand by the basic premise that we should not bifurcate the system based on a patient's ability to pay, whether it's a membership-based model or otherwise.
So you wouldn't, if we just kept the study, you would still be, you couldn't support it?
I don't believe it's in the legislature's interest to be studying something that disrupts patient care and could have significant consequences in New Hampshire to bifurcate and discriminate against patients. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Rocheford, and thank you, Ben, for taking my question. I appreciate you raising the patient bill of rights question, but I want to just get back. I want to get back to, like, who does this really apply to? Because I've had enough time sitting here thinking about this and listening to folks that it feels like it's almost like concierge medicine. So is this just the people who can pay these bills or who have the best insurance? And I have a follow-up to that, if depending on your answer.
Sure. So the way I would describe it is largely actually what previous testimony described, which is patients who don't need to have insurance. They don't, they're not covered by anybody and they can pay out of pocket, right? Well, I would argue that what happens when this patient who's going to one of these facilities, a skilled rehab facility, rehab or otherwise, and paying directly out of pocket, what happens when they need emergency care? What happens when they need, surgery? Or what happens when they need other things that they can't pay for out of pocket? Of course they need health insurance in order to cover the continuum of care from, the non-acute setting of primary care all the way to, those really critical services in an emergency situation that are life-saving, that otherwise I don't know a lot of people who can pay out of pocket for those services. So I was a little confused by previous testimony that suggests it really applies to a really narrow patient group of people, maybe an elite group of people that can pay out of pocket, that don't have health insurance for other things. But when those other things come up, I would expect those patients are going to need some kind of coverage to ensure that care is provided and paid for. Otherwise, those providers are going to be left with a bill and left without payment. So that's a concern of mine. Is anybody who is getting into this, and as described by the previous testimony, which was that it's anybody who doesn't have insurance and can pay out of pocket, they don't have coverage, for other things. That seems troubling to me.
I'm good
Okay.
for now. All right.
All right. Bob Dunn.
Insurance question.
Good morning,
Good
Senator
morning.
Rochefort, members of the committee. I'm Bob Dunn, the Director of Public Policy for the Catholic Diocese of Manchester, and I'm here today on behalf of Catholic Charities New Hampshire to respectfully register our opposition to HB 548. Catholic Charities is the largest non-governmental provider of nursing home care in the state. We have 6 nursing homes. And it's the unintended consequences of this bill for nursing homes that are the reason for our opposition. It's really important to remember that nursing home funding is based on a 3-legged stool. And the problem with this bill is that it would compromise 2 of the legs of that stool. One leg is Medicaid. And Medicaid is the lifeblood of nursing homes because on average, about 60 to 70% of the people in a nursing home in New Hampshire are on Medicaid. And as you know, Medicaid has been chronically underfunded for decades. And that has required nursing homes to turn to the other 2 legs of the stool. One of those is rehabilitation care. Rehabilitation services, short-term rehab. This is paid for by private pay or insurance or Medicare. The other leg is private pay. And even though the private payors represent only about 20 to 30% of the people in a nursing home, they are really critical here because the nursing homes get to set those rates for the private pay people. Unlike the Medicaid folks that are whose rates are set by the Department of Health and Human Services within the appropriation that the legislature gives. And so this bill, if it were to allow these other facilities to be created, would compromise those second two legs of the stool, which are critical to make up that Medicaid shortfall. I'll leave you just with one kind of concrete example. Imagine two gas stations on opposite corners of the street. One of them is a free market gas station. They can sell as much gas as they want. They can charge what they want. The Medicaid gas station across the street, the state tells that gas station how many gallons of gas you can sell, who you can sell the gas to, and how much you can charge for each gallon of gas. That gas station is not going to be able to survive. And so it needs to find alternative ways of raising funds. And because this bill has the unintended consequence of compromising that, it's a problem, and we oppose it respectfully. And so I will conclude and just wish everyone happy Easter and happy Passover.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No. Aubrey Friedman. Caitlin, that's the last person I have signed up. I don't know if there's anyone else.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Aubrey Friedman, I live in Bridgewater. I speak in support of this bill. I'm going to vary from what I kind of prepared a little bit, just to make 2 points, basically. I don't think that many, like has been discussed by the sponsor, I don't think this is going to affect that many people. It is mostly the rich people who've got a fair amount of resources that would be interested in a membership type of thing. So why not give the option for that? They're going to pay for their own. Why must they pay for everybody else's? They're not a burden on the system. If they're going to be paying for their own health care. Also, too, I think people who, this question came up about the Bill of Rights. I think, and I know a couple actually in my area, they go to a direct pay medical office. I'm suspecting he's older, so he probably already has Medicare. I think this is something extra they're taking just for, you want to go to the doctor quickly, don't want to start with waiting for 2 months ahead for your appointment and all the usual stuff, the insurance and all that kind of stuff. And so they are very happy with it. So I think it's something extra they have. So this question is, what happens if you get in to a facility, or you're going to have a surgery or something done and it runs into more, you would, they probably already have supplemental insurance, so I don't think they're going to be destitute. And secondly, I think another, oh, by the way, my friends are very happy with the primary care office that they go to. They love that doctor or nurse. There's no hassles with insurance. They know what they're going to pay. And they say they get more personal care, actually. It's better there. And the other thing that I think is important is this whole pricing business, to know what you're going to pay. I mean, the whole medical system, you go for anything, who cares? You know, your insurance company, Medicare, Medi-Cal, they're going to be paid for it. To know what things are going to cost, the idea of pricing, just to bring it out there, even if you had one facility that you could say, hey, they're going to charge, I don't know, so many thousand for colonoscopy or whatever services, your blood, or we have no idea what these things are going to cost. You rarely even see this stuff. So I think knowing what things are going to cost, the transparency is worth it right there. to help bring down healthcare costs, just the whole idea. And that's why I support the bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak on House Bill 548? I'm going to close the hearing.
Keith, good luck, buddy. Thank you. You take care. That's it.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to open the hearing on House Bill 705 relative to healthcare cost transparency. And I'll ask Representative Ammon to introduce his bill.
All right. Good morning, Health and Human Services Committee, Chair and members of the committee. It's good to be before you. My name is,
Thank you.
for the record, I saw you look confused. That was probably what it was. Good morning again, members of the committee and Mr. Chair. Thank you for hearing my introduction of House Bill 704. I am the prime sponsor. And I won't go over every line of this bill because it's a few pages long, but I do want to point you just to a few. The amended analysis is a good place to start. It requires disclosure of specific pricing information regarding covered items and services, and it's contingent upon a federal presidential executive order. So I'll show you where those things are in the bill. So in short, this bill is about increasing healthcare pricing transparency. And we know that medical services it's very difficult to find out what things cost. What this bill will do is it sort of drafts in behind the presidential executive order for transparency, and that we know the rules are being developed over this. And it adds an additional requirement of a standardized format. So imagine if you have 10 companies, they all have different formats. They can change them at will, and you're trying to assemble all that data together, trying to match, like for like in the different data sets. It can get very difficult, time-consuming, and then the results that you come up with, you may not be confident that you've captured, the data because it's trying to knit together things that don't exactly match. Just going over the bill very quickly. Page 1, line 4 is the definitions section. And you can read that at your leisure. I want to point you to continuing on page 2, line 6, the machine readable file. That's really what is at the heart of this bill, is a publicly available set of files that are machine readable. And then just continuing on, it talks a lot about identifiers. So like when you're dealing with data in a database, identifiers are very important. So it sort of specs out those identifiers. And I'm just going to keep skipping ahead because some of it's detail. Page 5, and I want to point your attention to line 13. And so one of the requirements is that these files would result in a standardization of format and terminology from one health plan to another, sufficient to facilitate the compilation by the commissioner of a market-wide data, market-wide cost comparisons between health plans and healthcare providers. And then line 16, there's a requirement that the files are publicly available. So Anyone that wants to build a business around these files would be free to do so. We were talking earlier in the hallway, the idea of tracking gas prices at the gas pump. There's an app called Gas Buddy that you can look up and you can see where near you there's, you can save a few cents per gallon. So this would kind of be like that. It would enable something where, what's that? The Gas Buddy app? I don't know. Maybe the stations pay for it somehow. I'm not sure how that's funded.
All right. We're on a time crunch.
Yeah.
Stay on task.
Oh.
Yeah. We're gonna stay on task.
So it'd be Health Buddy, maybe. I don't know what you would call it. But and this bill is a request from the insurance department. I'll say that, and it's to also help them, not only the public, but also help them, have some eyes into pricing. And I just wanted to mention the 3 different kinds of files, and then that'll conclude my testimony. I have a list here, if I could just find it. So there's 3 machine-readable files that are required. One file shows the costs for services provided by doctors and facilities that are part of the insurance network. Another file lists the maximum amount the insurance will pay for services from doctors and facilities outside of their network. So in network, out of network. And the third file focuses on prescription drugs, showing what the insurance pays for them and the average price after discounts and rebates. So that's kind of a summary of the data requirements. And there's one more thing that I should have mentioned, or I should mention before I end. Page 6, line 18, there's a contingency clause. And we amended that in House Commerce, to make it contingent on the guidance, the federal government firming up their guidance. So Section 1 of this act shall take effect 6 months after finalization of federal guidance. And so it puts about a year lag on when the insurance, so after that guidance is finalized, there's a 6-month window. And then there's an additional state rulemaking that happens. So it would put it out about a year after that executive order is finalized. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions and answer to the best of my ability.
I've got some questions, and maybe someone coming up speaking may be able to address these. But it just, as far as the implementation goes, I know that there's that trigger on the executive order, and you're waiting for the guidance document on that. Correct? If that never happens, then this doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a remote possibility, but
okay,
anything's possible.
Well,
yeah.
and who knows what's going on right now with the feds, right? I mean,
right.
I think there may not be anybody there to do it. So that kind of leads into my other questions. Do you know how many of our health plans have already begun this, or is this going to be a major requirement for our health plans that are participating, or are they doing it anyway? And
I think it's still kind of in conversational form, but there is some data that's being provided, and it's coming in all different. And someone behind me can speak better to this.
Yeah, and I'm not going to hold. Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I know somebody will. I just didn't know if you, through your conversations with the department, and I'm going to ask the department the same questions.
I mean, my sense of this bill is it sort of gives insurance companies a heads up that when they comply with the federal requirement, that we would like these additional, the standardization of format is really the key thing.
So fair warning for anyone sitting out there who's going to talk, you're going to get the same question. So
all
right. Any other questions, Senator Bird? No. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Let's start with the insurance department. This is your bill. So DJ Betancourt, if you could come up and give us some background on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to give just some brief introductory remarks, and then I'm going to give way to Dr. Azes and Michelle Heaton. Dr. Azes is here next to me. Michelle is behind. This legislation is part of our long-term effort, our long-time effort to increase transparency when it comes to the cost of health care. As I think has been referenced already, these requirements are coming. It is simply a matter of when and exactly how it's all going to work. What this legislation seeks to do is to ensure that there's no question that we'll have the authority to collect the data. The data will be used to enhance our health cost website. I lecture Dr. Azes all the time that you can attempt to boil the ocean with all of the data that you can collect. But at the end of the day, the data that's most important and where we need to be focusing our time and attention is on that data that at the end of it, when you've analyzed all of it, you've got something tangible and practical to assist the consumer, policymakers, other stakeholder groups. There's got to be an actual utility at the end of that process. And so for this legislation, again, the aim is to further enhance the very useful information that consumers can take advantage of when they go onto our health cost website. So I will leave it there and defer over to Dr. Azes and Michelle. Dr. Azes, you want to continue?
Thank you. Jason Azes, Director of Health Economics, Insurance Department. Happy to answer any questions. I did just want to point out the utility case that's primary for our department. The New Hampshire Health Cost website. Currently, we use claims data to inform our citizens on what they might expect to pay for a prospective healthcare service. But as it stands now, we have approximately 275 medical services and maybe 35 dental services listed out of the prospective maybe 10,000+ services that are covered benefits across the continuum of health insurers. So we have, meaning we have a very small sample of the services our citizenry may encounter. And by getting these transparency and coverage data in a standard uniform format across all of the insurers in the state, we now have a comparable but holistic model to be able to use as our analytic tool to post on health costs. And that's a game changer for the utility of New Hampshire health costs. So I want to point that out. Yeah.
Any questions?
Thank you, Chair Rochford. Dr. Aziz, and actually I was looking at New Hampshire health cost as you were talking, because I'm just trying to sort this out. The data's already here, and it's here by plan. Okay, so what am I missing?
So
See,
Jason,
it seems to me that the
of course,
transparency,
there's only
can you make the connection between the
course,
two?
yeah.
And I think for me,
So we're-
sorry, I'm being so simple about this.
Of
but
course, Jason, please though.
Jason.
Yeah. So we use what I call an empirical approach using the claims data to publish services for common procedures in New Hampshire. But there's a limitation there that because prices vary so wildly out of our responsibility to the public, we can't post median prices that vary wildly because we've heard feedback from different legislative committees about going to health cost and getting a price that they were not exposed to on their actual real encounter. So the reason why that happens is because of that price variability. So we only have a very small palette of services that actually get rendered to New Hampshire citizens that meet the statistical criteria to get published there. If we were to be able to employ these data to inform New Hampshire health costs, we could essentially have all services that are covered for in prices that are in network by provider and out of network. And that is much more voluminous, but also much higher utility for the citizens. There's countless procedures that you could go to any healthcare setting, but they're not represented on New Hampshire health costs because we're currently limited by the use of the claims data to do that. These self-reported data would change that.
So it's the claims data, that piece that you're using.
That we currently use.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So as a sneak preview, because I've been hearing about it now for a month, as a sneak preview, you're going to hear from some of the carriers that there's an additional cost for them to get into compliance with the legislation as it is written currently. You're going to hear a preference from them that they would prefer to wait until the federal guidance comes out. I, like you, Mr. Chairman, never hold my breath for Washington to do anything. But if that is the preference, And I do appreciate the fact that industry is facing some macroeconomic pressures as well as some uncertainty around some other proposals currently before the legislature. If it would be your preference for the committee to hang on to this bill and wait potentially for that federal guidance to come out, it would not be the end of the world for us. But at some point, as I've said, I think we do need to move forward with this legislation. But if you feel as though the timing would be better later, that would work for us. We'd be fine with that.
Thank you. And actually, I had a general question while you were here.
Maybe, yeah.
Page 5, line 13, which calls for the standardization and format and tech terminology and the way data is transmitted.
That's right.
This topic came up a week ago in another bill that we heard. Wouldn't you think that it's a fairly reasonable expectation that there should be a consistent way that data is transferred from one way to the other, and to ask a payer to do it 14 different ways is really unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right.
All right, I don't think you were there last week, and I figured I'd grab you and get two birds with one stone today. Thank you.
A plus on efficiency.
Yes, thank you, Senator Abar.
So you wouldn't mind if we re-referred it just for time?
If you felt as though that was the most prudent course of action, again, to see where that federal guidance may potentially, when it may come out, and what it might potentially contain, that's fine. Again, if you're moved by some of the cost implications for the carriers, I'm not a tech expert by any stretch of the imagination. Then, as I've said, you could hang on to it. It would not be the end of the world for the department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cam Lapine.
Superman. That's right.
That's the note I made last night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman,
Good
members of the
afternoon,
committee.
Cam.
For the record, my name is Cam Lapine. I work at Orin Reno, representing Cigna. We are in opposition to this bill. The idea of retaining it is a better idea than the bill. The bill as it was presented to carriers when we were given the chance to review some legislation with that, it would simply mirror the federal guidance into state statute, so that way the insurance department had a way to access the data. As you've heard, the federal requirements are in flux, might be the best way to word it. So there is the contingency clause in the bill, but if you look at the 5 previous pages of the bill, it puts in requirements in place. The bill has requirements. If the intention is just to mirror the federal guidance, whatever it ends up looking like, I don't understand why the bill currently has requirements. So I wanted to present that to you. My understanding is the only other state that I'm aware of that has their own kind of data reporting requirement like this is Colorado. And they, is my understanding, have paused their reporting program in light of the federal activity. So we are opposed to the bill, and I'll end my testimony there because it's
All
been
right,
a long
thank
day.
you very much. Any questions?
quick question,
Yes.
Chair, for Mr. Lapine.
Thank you.
So is it, I understand you're opposed, but are you saying because it's already, they're in federal, well, it's in an executive order, correct? Since there's a federal requirement
So
that we don't need to be, that the department doesn't need to be as specific, it could just reference and say, here's the requirement, just do that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The executive order so there were rules in existence from the first Trump administration. They implemented them during the Biden administration. The second Trump administration come in, said these requirements aren't working, they're not accomplishing the goal, and it gave several government agencies 90 days to look at what they have now and figure out how to fix it. I lost my train of thought there. I am so sorry.
Where are we within? Go ahead.
It's okay. What I was just trying to get, you said it has all of these requirements in here.
Right.
But there are already federal requirements, so
Right.
is it your suggestion or position that, if, I know you're opposed to this, but you could just point to those? I'm not saying that I'm in favor of this. I'm just trying to sort out what exactly you mean.
If the bill simply said the insurance commissioner shall adopt rules that will require, I'm just spitballing here,
Consistent with-
substantially similar to the federal requirements when they are published, I don't know how much of an issue that would be. But where this goes is it's taking requirements and putting them in statute when we don't know what the federal guidance is going to be.
Right, there, you got it. Thank you.
If I may, where are we within the 90-day frame?
I think we're probably about 30 days in,
Okay.
give or take.
So
Came out February 25th, I've been told.
I don't,
Yeah, that's right. Is it a late bill?
Anyway, no one was.
That's a good point.
so a re-refer, maybe address it at another time with what you suggested might work.
So a re-refer would give you through those 90 days, definitely. It's not entirely clear if the federal government is going to have new rules at the end of those 90 days or if they're going to come up with some kind of an agreement to come up with rules at the end of the 90 days. But re-referring would give time for that 90-day process to work.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. I think I agree. All right.
Thank you.
Paula Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Paula Rogers, and I'm here on behalf of AHIP, America's Health Insurance Plans, and I want to pick up on some of the things that have come up and keep it very brief. And I have some handouts, which if you had the stomach to read them, I'd be impressed, but I'm handing them to you because they sort of lay out the whole problem. The problem is there was a federal directive over the last several years for both hospitals and plans to provide them data, and they had formats for doing that. And everybody sort of conformed. The hospital data came in first. My understanding, the hospital data had understandably some irregularities because just because you're told you have to do it a certain way, you may not be able to accommodate it, or in good faith, you haven't accommodated it properly. Plans did the same. It sounds like plans information was slightly more useful. So regrouping at the federal level, there was a sense, now what do? We have all this data, and then Colorado and New Hampshire have sort of stepped into the void saying, well, we like the concept of getting more data. The problem is the data that's filed for federal purposes for the New Hampshire Insurance Department doesn't quite conform with what they would like to receive. And so the dislocation between that data set, which is under review as a result of an executive order, and the data set the department might want could be different. And that means that there would have to be reconfiguration amongst the plans to accommodate the request. So now we have this contingency situation, which says almost like, well, don't worry about it. There's plenty of time. Once the federal order of February 25th is conformed with, which talks about guidance at the federal level, I look up guidance under the federal procedure rules, and that could be a whole new rulemaking. And so I'm thinking, okay, so what is going to firm up the guidance at the federal level? And I don't know that. And an executive order may not produce it, certainly won't produce it in 90 days. And so I'm asking to the plans, well, we're worrying about it. So it's an obligation once it's in the law. And my recollection, back when the department developed the CHIS system that you've heard so much about, that Senator Prescott referenced, there was a collaborative arrangement with plans sitting at the department, and a researcher at the department, Leslie Ludke, who was a soldier, who said, we need to do this. This is how we want to do it. Let's come up with the format. And that, I think, is a more rational way, rather than putting this contingency clause in some uncertain piece of legislation to provide data, because it's not that the plans don't want to give data. If they're going to have to give it, they want to give it in the most cost-effective and conforming fashion so that it is truly utilizable. That's a mouthful, but
So you would be fine with re-referral at this point?
absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any, I have any questions? No. Sabrina, you're up.
Ditto.
You're fine with re-referral?
better than the bill passing.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sabrina Dunlap. I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations for Anthem. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I would say we are opposed to HB 705 for a number of reasons. I'm going to try to skim through so I don't repeat anything. I just would start with saying, with respect to the overall concept of transparency, we agree with it in theory, but we've seen this play out at the federal level. It is expensive, it's time consuming, and honestly, it's not all that useful to submit the massive amounts of data that we're already required to submit, which is why, to their credit, the federal government's taking sort of a fresh look. They have the executive order and they're engaging stakeholders to talk about what's working and what's not with these massive files that we have to submit. And so I think it's important, we talk about transparency always being a good thing, but it's really important to pause and ask, what is the purpose and is it worth the cost? I engaged my team that deals with the federal regulations on transparency. And they said it's hard to overstate how enormously complex machine readable files are from a logistical and technical standpoint. Our published files cover rates by network, facility, physician, code, place of service, and location. These rates have been sourced across numerous platforms, oftentimes imputed through intricate calculations, and the project involved creating completely new computing capabilities. The cost to complying with these requirements is massive. There's the initial implementation, and then we have to do monthly updates. It is astronomical how much this costs. And I do want to note, all of this data is already available on each of the carriers' websites. I think you brought that up, Senator Prentice, but it's true. You can go look. This data is out there. It's available. We have it on our websites. We understand the department's intent was not to recreate the wheel here, but I think, as you've heard, there's a lot of questions around what the federal government is going to do, and it seems troubling to put into statute specific requirements under state law that may or may not reflect what's going to happen at the federal level. And I would again come back to, do we need that, and what is the point of it, and is it worth the cost that we are going to see? I would just add really quickly, Colorado has sort of gone through this, and I think it's been challenging. Anthem is in Colorado, so I've talked to my colleagues there. So I was going to get into some thoughts on, language we could suggest if the bill were to move forward, but hopefully that is not the case. So I would just end by saying, we recognize the importance of transparency, but again, would question, is this really needed at the state level? I think it would be us and Colorado are the only two states. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Any questions? No. Thank you. Peter
Thank
Bragdon's up next. Peter's our last speaker, unless there's somebody else who'd like to speak after Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, we would also support a re-refer, by the way. And just for some context here, this all started with an original executive order from the first Trump administration. They required these files to be created, but they didn't specify a specific format. They gave a general. So everybody's doing something different. So the files aren't necessarily that useful. So on February 25th, President Trump issued another executive order saying, fix this. So we'll see how they fix this. The first section of the bill is all definitions. Those are word for word from the existing federal rule that President Trump has said we need to fix. So yeah, rather than put everything in statute now and do this, let's wait and see what's happening from the federal government. I can tell you it cost each of the carriers, including Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, millions of dollars to implement this first round. Now, chances are that whatever comes up the second round, a lot of that can be duplicated, but we don't know. It's the uncertainty. So putting this off, I think, would be a great step, and I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions? Anyone? Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak on House Bill 705? With that, I'm going to close the hearing.
It's too late.
Who wanted to speak?
Oh. There was one point where I think that Jennifer from the department was nodding her head differently than the presenter. I'm looking at the difference between what the federal regulation and what's proposed in this bill. So I didn't know if we clarify that offline.
Yeah, either way, I'm happy to come up and just take 2 minutes.
We're going to re-refer it anyway.
We're gonna probably dispense with this right now if we want to. I have a motion
You
for
don't want the
executive session.
suspense of what might happen?
The second, are you ready, Sophie? I've got a motion from Senator Avard, second from Senator Birdsall. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? We're in executive session. I've got a motion to re-refer
Second.
House Bill 705 from Senator Birdsall. I have a second from Yes. Second from Senator Avard. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Consent.
Senator Avard moves consent.
Second.
Senator Prentice seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Senator Long, would you like to take this one out?
Sure.
All right. Do we want, I mean, I've got a 12:30, but if there's anything else we want to talk about?
I'd like to kill 316.
No, I want to hold on to that.
You want to hold on?
Yeah.
to it?
Yeah.
All right.
It's 316, the one this morning.
No, I wasn't here for that.
How about the critical access hospitals? You want to do that one? We definitely don't want to do that one.
Do you want to do 7:31?
7:31.
It's not what we heard today.
Yes, we heard that last week. Yeah, we'll do 7:31. Are you guys ready for 7:31? This is a fairly easy. I've got an amendment that I'm going to bring forward.
That all depends on your amendment.
Did you?
I think I sent that along.
7:31.
Did you want to do the biologics too? Because you had an amendment for that.
Okay, hold on.
I got another one coming.
Oh.
Yep, because I needed to update that. I
All
think
right, I'll move
unless
on.
it's in here.
I'll move on to pass on 7:31.
All right, we've got a motion ought to pass on 7:31. Do I have a second?
Second.
I got a second. So this is a fairly straightforward bill, as I recall. We had one person that was in person who opposed, as I recall. And then as I think Senator Avard asked if they would be willing to live with this for a year and get their problems addressed next year, and I didn't think they were opposed to that. I just had an amendment I wanted to put forward, and I would move this amendment. It's 1588S.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. So all this does is it just says, you know, these community living facilities have to comply with state and local zoning ordinances, and it just makes it clear. You know, there's been some question in other communities about this, and that's all that does. And then it refers to this section of law in the original bill, so that's where it's pointing to. So, any further discussion on the amendment? All right, I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? So the amendment passes.
Move on to pass as amended.
Yeah, 5-0. Yeah, I didn't hear any opposition. Oh, did you not vote?
I'm still where I've got.
You going too fast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I had the disability rights community bring forward some language that I just got today.
I'm going too fast. Just
I-
let me know.
Yeah, I was trying to match
Just
it up.
tell me to pump the brakes.
You're okay.
I'm not offended by that. So we do have ought to pass as amended. So if you want to take a look at that.
I mean, we can go ahead and move this forward, and then if these two don't comport enough, some of it looks like it's the same, some of it might be different. We can always, it's a potential for a floor amendment if we're not getting where we need to be.
Right. Yeah.
And
that sounds
it
good.
literally was like last minute, so I have this and I have this, and I'm like, oh,
All right.
thank you.
So
Some of it's the same.
the motion is ought to pass as amended. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Consent.
The consent. We have a motion for consent. We have a second. I'll second that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah. So all those in favor of consent say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it's on consent.
I'll take it out.
And Senator Avard will pick it up. Yes, 5-0 on consent. And then Senator Avard made the motion for consent. I seconded it.
Okay, and then, so for that amendment,
No. We all agreed.
5-0.
5-0. I think. Senator Prentice, did you?
I said I would do, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
and if I-
Yes. And I have a 12:30, so I'm going to have to.
Motion to move out of exec?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So we're out of executive session, so we will adjourn for the day. And then just a note to the committee, we're going to change the start time next week from 9:45 to 9 o'clock. It's going to be a long day.